Welcome to listeners to Conversations in Color. The mission of this podcast is to advance the story of United Christian Parish through its social platform that provides dialogue with respected leaders in our nation's capital and its surrounding communities. Our intent with this podcast is to share the impact of our guests' work and their efforts in terms of the organizations in which they are part of, to provide solutions to the important issues of our communities. And in production of Conversations in Color, I need to say that it could not happen without Kate Hoeing, who is the Director of Communications and the Director of All Things Great at United Christian Parish. So hello, Kate. And we here at UCP, we are grateful to you for your dedicated presence. I had this written down, but I say it either way.
Yes, thank you, Pastor Marcus. I am super excited to be here with you and Sarah.
Thanks, Kay. And you just mentioned Sarah, and we want to say welcome to Conversations in Color. It's our pleasure to say welcome to the Director for Faith-Based Engagement and Community Outreach at Cornerstones, Sarah Casey. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for having me here. And it's lovely to be back with the UCP family. I think it was, I don't even know what month it was. It was a little while back where I got to spend a Sunday with you guys. So I'm delighted to be here.
It was a beautiful Sunday, and the flowers were blossoming, the music was playing, and the people were dancing in our hearts and in our spirits as Sarah blessed us with the sermon that we will continue to remember here at United Christian Parish. Sarah,
thank you.
You're welcome. And in March of this year, Carrie Wilson, the Chief Executive Officer of Cornerstones, was the guest on this podcast. And our listeners learned about Cornerstones as an organization founded in this community of Northern Virginia, initially as the Reston Interfaith. And recently, Cornerstone celebrated its 50th year of assisting individuals and families in order to move towards greater stability and self-sufficiency. And it is indeed a pleasure to have you with us, Sarah, and indeed to learn a bit more about the work of Cornerstones. And so for the listeners of this podcast, would you describe your role as Cornerstone's Director for Faith-Based Engagement and Community Outreach?
I would be happy to. And I'm grateful that you said all of those words. It's a very long title. I sometimes just say all things faith related and getting involved in Cornerstones, because there's a lot of commas, there's a lot of hyphens. There's a lot happening there.
Yeah.
So my role is a relatively new one here at Cornerstones. As you mentioned, we started out as Reston Interfaith over 50 years ago. I think I did the math, and bear with me because I was a humanities major, and it's our 53rd year of service that we're in right now. So delighted to be doing this work still. And as you said, it was founded as Reston Interfaith. So a group of Christians and Jewish communities came together and said, we're really worried about our neighbors. We're worried about what it's like to live here, how people are able to live here or not. So what can we do when it comes to affordable housing, homelessness, and other issues that are facing our community? And so as you can imagine, in the last 50 years, there's been a lot of growth in this area, a lot of growth with our partners. And one of the things that the leadership has been thinking in the last couple of years is, where can we engage better and more deeply with our faith partners? You know, those people that have been with us from the beginning, whether it's our founding partners or partners who have come along and worked alongside us in the last 50 years. So what can we do to show that we value those partnerships and to also deepen them? And so I like to think of it as a one-stop shop for all of our faith partners. If you at UCP or any other church, temple, shul, mosque in our area want to get involved, you call me, you send me an email, and I can help make that happen, from volunteering at the shelter to being part of our advocacy team. I really am excited to learn what our faith partners' missions are and what their values are when it comes to community. And I'm like a kid in a candy store, I get to play around in this and say, ooh, okay, this congregation over here cares about food insecurity. This congregation over here cares about homelessness. And how can we help you live that mission in the way that you feel called? Because I think that's an important part of faith traditions. And especially in this area, there's so much affluence, and whether that's finances or of time, people who have that call are looking for places to fulfill it. And so I get to be the one that helps do that, which is so fun for me because I grew up in this area. I used to intern at Cornerstones. I have a master's in theological studies. And so I feel really strongly that faith communities are perfectly poised to do this. And so to be able to be that kind of connector and conduit to do that is honestly my dream job. And I told HR this after they hired me. So I felt like it was okay to say it once I'd had the offer in hand. I didn't want to lead with it. Yeah, I didn't want to lead with it. I didn't want to seem either too eager or is she just saying this? Maybe she's just saying this, but no, very much this is the joy of this as a new position, is that I get to kind of come in here and say, what about this? Have we thought about that? What did we do when this happened? And I get to work on all of our teams, our development team, our communications team, our advocacy team, our volunteer team. So I get to go around having a lot of fun most days.
Well, thanks, Sarah. So a follow-up to that first question, what has impressed you the most about Cornerstone's impact upon the Herndon Reston communities?
That is a great question. And I think I'd have to start with longevity and reputation. Those are two things that when our neighbors think of Cornerstones, I think they think those two things. I hope they do, at least, that we're an organization that has been around for quite some time. And from that, I take, we're not just existing, we're doing the work. We exist in proximity with our neighbors. And that's something that I find really impressive in terms of a social service organization, that we're not existing on a different tier from our neighbors. We're not distancing ourselves from them. We're deeply embedded in the community. We have the Herndon Neighborhood Resource Center. We've got Connections for Hope and Re-Wrecker Shelter, our ASAP pantry. And we've also got a few different neighborhood centers within some communities in the Herndon Reston area. And so the fact that we are proximate and part of our community is something that is really important to me, because I think it's important when you do social service work, not to swoop in, not to make decisions for communities based on what the latest academic data is or what the latest trend in community service is, but how do we authentically listen to our neighbors and take that feedback and provide support informed by our neighbors, not just, oh, I'm Sarah and I think this is what Reston needs. That's not going to help anybody. But if there are ways that we can listen to our neighbors, ways that we can elevate those concerns, whether it's through advocacy, through working with elected officials, I just think that proximity and that reputation that we've gained by being proximate and by being a longstanding nonprofit in this area is something that makes me proud to work here, and also attracted me to work here, that this is an organization that doesn't shy away from existing in community. And I think that that's sadly rarer and more rare in a lot of community engagement spaces.
Yeah, I remember, and this was Sarah, you may have been born by this time, but when I initially started working with the ministry, it was called Crossroads Ministry. It's now nomenclature is Crossroads for Anti-Racism. But they were based in Racine, Wisconsin, and Chicago. And it was one of the first of this type of organization that was really doing significant work. And I say this was about 30, almost 40 years ago. I was introduced
Sarah wasn't born yet.
I was going to say, give me a year, Marcus, and I can tell you how old I was.
So I came into some familiarity beginning to work with them about 25 years or so.
I
And
was alive for that.
you
Yeah,
were
I was
alive.
alive
You were
for that.
okay. You were alive for that. And so when they began to do this work, looking at institutional racism and poverty, and beginning with groups in Louisiana, and when you go to those communities, and those impoverished communities, those communities that have been pushed aside in so many ways and stepped on in others, you don't go to those communities and say, we want to do a power analysis. And yet, that's exactly what this group did with Crossroads. They went in and they worked alongside of the folks who were in those communities. And what they talked about was the big foot of racism that steps on those communities, that kicks those communities. And that's how they came up with the way of, so to speak, a certain relevance of how they were going to be able to go into and work alongside the folks in those communities and to talk about those issues that we have so much familiarity with now when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they were looking at this and working with these communities, almost 40 years ago. And so that's what really impressed me when they talked about it in the same way that you just did, in terms of longevity and integrity, because it's the name, and people associate the name of Crossroads with the work that's happening in our communities. And so, when you said that, those two things, you may not have used the other word, integrity. I think you may have used a different word, but longevity. And what was the other word you used, Sarah?
I think just proximity.
Proximity, yeah.
Well, and to what you're saying, nobody's going to make you a plate if you come in and say, hi, we're going to do a power analysis of this community and what the issues are. And I think, I want to be part of communities where somebody does want to make me a plate, and I can make somebody a plate of, oh, okay, here's this person that's genuinely concerned with my welfare, my well-being, and not in fixing it the way that she thinks it should be fixed, but understanding what the lived experience is so that we can elevate this together and from a place of authenticity that might actually have impact on systemic change instead of niceties and platitudes to make people feel like they're doing change-making work. But what I believe that systems work, systems change has to be done in community and has to be done with vulnerability and with authenticity. And those are not easy things for humans, let alone for organizations to do. And so the fact that churches, the fact that nonprofits are not always going to get that right, but if we approach it with humility of, hey, I recognize my privilege, I may not recognize all of it, but I'm here to listen, and to do that active listening of listening to understand and not listening to respond, I think that's something that we could all benefit from, quite frankly.
I agree. Sarah, the name of this podcast is Conversations in Color. And it's a metaphor to describe the in-depth discussions that tend to have lasting impact upon our lives. So most of the issues in our lives that we process, they don't exist as obvious contrasts, black and white. There's gray. But then because of these many issues that we must consider, they're often textured richly, with complications. Those complications give us even more colors, and the greens and the blues and the hazels and some of the other different colors that we come in life. And so that's the sense of the metaphor of our conversations with our guests. Do you remember your first conversation, your first true conversation in color? And if so, with whom was it? And as a follow-up, what was the discussion?
Yes. So I have a funny answer and I have a real answer, because you can't invite me to come talk without me trying to make jokes. So you should have anticipated this.
Well, that's one of the things that I really love about you is your humor, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so go ahead and tell us.
So my funny one, my short funny one is I grew up outside of Boston, with parents that were not from the Boston area. My dad's from Kentucky, my mom's from Miami. So my parents don't have Boston accents, but I've always been a very unintentional mimic. And so I was in the car with my mom one day when I was about 4 or 5. And I said, Mama, I'm really confused. I have a question. And she's like, okay. I said, we live in Andover, but my best friend Renee lives in Andova. What's that about? And so it was the first time that in my head, this like, people talk differently. People aren't the same. I have these 2 parents that in my head, don't have accents. But when you're living in the Boston area, if you don't have a Boston accent, you have an accent.
Yes.
And so my mom pulled over the car because she was laughing too hard. And she was like, okay, how do I explain colloquialisms and regional dialects to a 4-year-old? And so she just didn't say anything. She was like, yep, that's correct. You live in Andover and she lives in Andova. That's right. So that's the short funny one. But in all honesty,
in North Carolina, we say the challenge for us is the diphthong, right? When you put 2 vowels right next to each other, what do we do with it? Y'all,
all y'all.
What do we do with those?
Well, see, in Boston, they drop R's from where they should be and they put R's where they shouldn't be. So it's you're out of luck no matter which way you throw it. But around the same time, so I grew up in a family with basically a stay-at-home dad, which was something that not a lot of my friends had experienced. Even today, I don't think is super common. My dad would make me qualify this with saying he was finishing a PhD. So he was working, air quotes, sorry, Dad. He was working, but he was also at home helping raise my older brother and me. And we lived in a tiny apartment outside of Boston. My mom worked at the Hewlett-Packard factory. She was a production manager. And so my parents were frugal. We lived within our means. And one time I asked my dad, I said, Daddy, are we rich? And I don't know why I asked him this question. I don't know if I had just seen some, commercial on TV for the latest thing. And I was wondering, hey, how come we don't have that? I genuinely don't know. But I looked at my dad and I said, Dad, are we rich? And to his credit, he could have looked around this 2-bedroom apartment that was garden level, probably no more than 700 square feet, where he was getting a stipend, but he wasn't working a labor intensive job. Well, certain types of labor intensive. I don't want to offend anybody currently or previously having done a PhD.
Yeah.
And he could have looked around this tiny apartment and said, look around you, kid. Does this look like richness to you? Does this look like what wealth looks like? And he just said, yes. He said, yes, we are rich. And It wasn't until later that he qualified that with me, until I got a little bit older, of, richness includes the quality of your relationships, the safety of your household, the ability to go where you want to go when you need to go, to access things that other people can't access. And so kind of going back to proximity, I think he explained this to me later. He said, in proximity or in relation to some of the people we went to church with or went to school with, no, we weren't rich. But if you take into account our place in the world, our place in this kind of global citizenship that we are part of, we are incredibly rich. And he says, I was like, okay, cool, and just walked away. But it's one of those family stories that sticks, of here I was at 4 or 5 trying to make sense of richness, poorness, poverty, wealth. What do those things mean and where do I fit? And to my parents' credit, they were honest. I think deeply honest that they took stock of their environment and of the life they were providing for my brother and for me and said, yes, we are rich. There's so much here. And I really credit them for handling a very intense question from your 4-year-old when, I was probably watching Teletubbies and just non sequitured over there and said, Dad, do we have money? Are we of wealth? And he was able to kind of put that in the gray, put it in the, it's not this or that, it's and how that type of conversation is necessary. And I appreciate that he didn't go into an economics lesson and draw me some graphs and stuff like that. Like he just answered it and we moved on. But it was, I think that really was the first time I noticed, okay, there's differences in the world and we're all trying to make sense of where we fit into those. And so I'm grateful to my dad for handling a fastball question like that pretty well.
I think as parents, those are the moments when our children, when they have that consciousness for the question, that we have to be willing to be as honest as we can possibly be, and yet to be as considerate for the innocence that's still there. And it sounds like your parents, and in particular your dad in that instance, did you one of the greatest services that a parent could do, and to give you that kind of a foundation. And so I want to lighten the moment for us just a bit, and so we have a segment that is called Take Two, and that's a segment where parishioners of UCP are invited to use 2 minutes or thereabouts to tell their own stories of being a part of UCP. And each story will be a parishioner's response to the following questions: who are you? And what attracted you or your family to UCP?
Hello, my name is Debbie Holliday Phillips. I became aware of United Christian Parish about 2 years ago, right at the start of the pandemic. I had just finished a 6-month session online myself, facilitating a session on Jamar Tisby's book, The Color of Compromise. And after that, I was really intrigued by the topics and I wanted to continue the discussions. And so I just did a Google search and I used the keywords racial reconciliation on Zoom. And that's how I found United Christian Parish Church. I started attending the services on Sunday with the Walk in Faith. They were talking about the same kinds of topics that are of interest to me, which are topics related to diversity and racial unity. I attended every Sunday, and 2 years later, voila, I'm still here. It's just that simple.
Sarah, for you, I would like to share a question. Would you rather? Now, the intent of this question, as I said, is to have a bit of fun with you. And in playing this game, Would You Rather, it's a segment that's dedicated to my kids. And the reason that is somewhat of a dedication to them, both of my kids are now adults, is that during their adolescence, we would imagine these scenarios. And usually it was 2 scenarios. And you had to make a decision between one of those 2 scenarios that you were given. Sometimes neither of the 2 scenarios seemed any good. And sometimes both scenarios seemed especially good. But the task was always the same, Sarah. You're given 2 possible scenarios, but you can only pick one. Therefore, the question, would you rather?
Let's go.
Ready? All right.
Yes.
I see the enthusiasm is just coming through. So the first one, Sarah, you have the opportunity to share a walk in conversation with the late actor and comedian Robin Williams along a path in Peru. Second question, the second scenario is that you are able to share a breakfast and conversation with the late author and theologian C.S. Lewis at the Rock Cafe at the campus of Harvard Divinity School. All right, Sarah, your answer and the follow-up question to your answer is always, tell us why.
So I almost feel like you shot yourself in the foot here, Marcus, because you said you wanted to lighten the mood. And I'm here to tell you that in this incredibly difficult choice, I would have to go with taking a walk with Robin Williams in Peru. I got to go to Peru in high school. Our Spanish department would take a trip every 2 years to a Spanish speaking country. And so my senior year, I was lucky enough to go on the Peru trip, and we spent a good bit of time in Cusco. And again, history major, humanities person, that's my jam. And humor is part of my DNA. And so Robin Williams is a fixture of my childhood, you know, whether it was Mrs. Doubtfire or Flubber or Patch Adams.
Yep.
Dead Poet Society when you get a little bit older. Hopefully your kids aren't watching Dead Poet Society. I wouldn't recommend it. But I think I'd have to choose that because Robin Williams has a quote, and I should have written it down, but it says something like, the people who feel most deeply are often the ones who care the most about making people laugh because they don't want people to experience that loneliness on their own. And for me, humor is not just my coping mechanism, but I like to get close to people through humor. I like people to feel kind of a little bit less pressure in an interaction. And given what we now know of what Robin Williams carried with him through his life, to have an opportunity to talk with him about what vulnerability and feelings are like for people who often put up this armor and this wall of, oh, it's all fine. I'm making you laugh. I'm going to do my bit. I'm going to do the song and dance. I'm going to make you laugh. And we're not going to talk about the deep stuff because we're just here to have a good time. I'd love to know from his perspective, as somebody who felt deeply, what can we be doing better, or what can we be doing differently to make it easier for people to talk about stuff like that, to make it easier for people to bring depression, anxiety, sadness, grief, whatever it is, to conversations in ways that we can all hear that and not say, oh, it's Robin Williams. He's the funny guy. He can't really be feeling that. He's always feeling jovial. He's always feeling happy. And I identify with that so deeply in terms of it's people who feel the feels that want to make people laugh. And there's a really awful meme that goes around that says, my trauma didn't make me stronger, but it made me funnier. And I think that having an opportunity to talk to somebody whose life's work was making people laugh, but who also carried that weight of deep emotion, I would relish the opportunity to pick his brain on that. I can pick up any book and read C.S. Lewis's theology, and that's something that is still very valid and worth exploring. But I think on that human interaction level, to have a chance to dig inside his mind and to be vulnerable would be just incredible. Just honestly, so cool.
Yeah. C.S. Lewis, you didn't see the humor in the Screw Tape Letters?
Well, I mean, you do Screw Tape Letters versus Flubber. How are you gonna like That's a kind of an easy decision to make, Marcus, that if you're really putting those two on the table. Or like you've got, the humor of a Mr. Tumnus and things like
Yes,
that. But
yes,
again,
yes.
you put Mr. Tumnus and Mrs. Doubtfire next to each other, and I'm sorry, I'm a child of the 90s. I'm gonna go with my gut and go with Mrs. Doubtfire.
Well, what is it, Mr. Worm? What was it in Screw Tape letters? What was the name? I can't.
Oh,
Was it Wormwood or I can't remember.
that sounds right.
Yeah, with the questions there, but what is the phrase? I digress. But I think with comedians, one of the things I remember,
Mhm.
one of the better of the comedians was the discussion of how the work of comedians is to give us life and to give those examples of the rawness of our
Mhm.
experience, for us to look at ourselves, examine ourselves, and then still have the power to laugh at ourselves.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that Robin Williams was truly one of the best
I agree.
to do that. I think that we miss those moments when we fail to ask, how in the world did that particular person find the strength as well as the insight to create a laugh from this particular moment? When David Letterman was able in his show, a few days after 9/11,
Mhm.
to be able to bring an audience to laughter when people were still wondering, is it okay to laugh? You know, and there's so many other examples of it, but it's the in the church is the true pastoral work of when a ministry is able to allow, and this is me, I'm not speaking on behalf of UCP, but when a ministry is able to allow a group of people who have been taught to think, and most often, unfortunately, in churches, to think incorrectly, to think
Sure.
theologically immaturely
Mhm.
about certain topics. And when a ministry is able to help a group of people to actually look at themselves, look at what the history has been, and then to be able to laugh and then to reason
Mhm.
and to say, this is how we go forward.
Mhm.
And even Jesus Christ did that.
Well, I was having this conversation with my mom the other day about if we as Christians believe in Jesus's humanity and divinity, Jesus laughed, Jesus cried. There's so much to think about there in terms of if we want to live in the likeness of this figure, or if Christians want to live in the likeness of that figure, that includes the capacity for vulnerability and vulnerability for laughter as well as for change. And I think that in any work, especially related to justice and to, quite frankly, heavier topics, there has to be that vulnerability. And I didn't really understand humility until a few years ago. I grew up in a church, and so you humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and then you have all the chorus that follows that. And I think just putting your own baggage on the table and saying, I'm just gonna leave it here for right now. Let's talk about it. And hopefully when I leave, it'll be a little bit lighter. But having the common understanding of we're all going to show up to this with vulnerability, we're all going to show up to this with humility, I think is a foundation of improv comedy and places where you're trying to get the laugh. But what does it look like if we flip that into, I'm not trying to get the laugh, I'm trying to get people who are diametrically opposed to things to come to the table and say, hey, we all find this interesting, we all find this funny, we all find this sad, let's discuss. And I think that's power of comedy that should also be part of our conversations. So basically, Robin Williams should still be here, and he should tell us how to fix societal problems. I think that'd be all set. He'd do it in a funny voice, and we would all be better for it.
I would love to have had the opportunity to invite Robin Williams
Oh my gosh.
for a sermon at United Christian Parish.
You would have had to film it, because for people, if they were just listening, they'd be thinking there's 50 people on stage right
That's
now.
right. That's right.
Giving me a kind of Greek chorus of a sermon right now. And it's really just Robin Williams doing 50 bits.
That's
And
right.
it's just incredible. Just
You
love
had a good joke on Sunday, Pastor Marcus.
it. Ooh, tell us.
That's why the chicken crossed the road. This was was it part of the sermon or right before?
You know, actually, it was an extemporaneous type thing. And the kids were having, that was one of the best examples of laughter and fun at
Tell
church.
us.
The kids, they had a song about laughter, and within the song, there were, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" jokes. And so when it was time for me to begin the sermon, one of the first things that I felt like I wanted to do was to encourage what the kids were doing. So my first words were directed towards the kids who had just done this. And I figured they had not heard this, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" pun. Why did the chicken cross the road? One of them heard that on the dinner menu was chicken salad.
Did the kids love it? Did they love that?
My wife, who was sitting near them, said that they did laugh, but as quickly as they laughed, they came back at me. I got another one. Why did the chicken cross the road? So,
That's amazing. And that's so, what's so funny to me about that is because you said your joke, and I'm like, I have one I want to tell him. I've got one I want to tell him. And
Yeah.
I'm a late 20-something-year-old adult. And I'm also the person who said not too long ago, we need to listen to understand and not listen to respond. And I'm sitting here like, let me tell my joke. Let me tell my joke. And it's like, okay, dude, chill. Actually,
yeah, so
listen.
tell us your joke.
Oh, so when is baseball mentioned in the Bible?
Fourscore? No. Tell us.
In the beginning.
In the beginning.
The big inning.
The big inning.
Like you've got innings in baseball.
I
so
got
in the
that.
beginning.
I got that, Sarah.
Thank you, Kate.
I
Thank you,
got
Kate.
that. I caught that. I did.
My other Bible related joke is how does Moses make tea?
Hebrews.
He brews it.
Mm.
So these are free jokes that you can tell Marcus. That if
Yeah.
you drop those during Sunday and let me know how the kids respond to it. That'll be our meter, our gauge for how good of a joke it was.
I could get into trouble with this one. Sarah,
Yes.
so I'm
Yeah,
not.
Yeah, church jokes, and you're a pastor. I'm a daughter of a pastor, so it's,
Yeah.
We have a kindred spirit and I think a similar level of humor that is niche if anybody ever asked.
So I wanted to ask this question, Sarah. I know we're getting close to time. We may even be past time, but I was looking at a couple of statistics in regards to hunger,
Yes.
and those who are unhoused. And is that more, you feel like, the proper or the more kind of conscious way of discussing it, first of all, in terms of unhoused versus homeless?
Oh, I've always wanted to know this answer.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question.
And a couple of things that I was looking at, Sarah, is that in the subsidized public housing, I would often think about a larger group of a family, sometimes 5 people trying to be in a particular dwelling when you talk about subsidized housing.
Sure.
But it seems like in 2020, because of what is the average income for folks who are trying to exist in this country, who are living in public housing, which is around $15,000. But it's 2 people.
Mm.
2 people who are trying to manage in subsidized housing.
Yeah.
And an income of about $15,000.
Yep.
So one in 8 kids that'll probably go hungry today. Can you describe the feelings of hope that you and perhaps the many talented people around you experience as you do the important work that supports the mission of Cornerstones, with a sense of what you're dealing with?
Yeah. I think hope is critical. Hope is vital in any work, but especially in work when you're working with other people. And the thing that I value about my coworkers is that they have a unique ability to take data and show the impact on real people. So, whether it's at Laurel Learning Center, where you see children, you see kids from all walks of life. You don't go and sit and count every 8 off and say, oh, okay, that one's going to go home and go hungry. Okay, this child's going to go home and go hungry. You see kids who are happy to be there. You see staff members who are some of the longest tenured staff at Cornerstones work at the Learning Center, and they've been there for decades. And so you see hope in those interactions, in that you've got a place where kids are fed. You've got a place where kids are happy, where they're seen, where they're heard, where they're supported. And this isn't just at the Learning Center. This is by their parents. These are by their caretakers, the people for whom they are out working multiple jobs to support. And so I really think the fact of turning data into what the lived experience is a real strength of my coworkers here, that our case managers, our shelter staff, our folks that work at the food pantry are so dedicated to being a neighbor, not just being, I'm a provider of a service, you're a client, but we are all humans, we are all experiencing this. And what that can do to change your interaction is huge. And I think, to your point about language, unhoused versus homeless, this is tangential, but I'm a student of 19th century American history, especially around enslavement. And so there's a lot of literature on what it means to say people first language of enslaved rather than a slave. Nobody really enslaved themselves. That was something done to them. And so I don't know what the literature is on unhoused versus homeless, but the thing I like about unhoused versus homeless is my home can be anywhere. My home can be my people. My home can be my church, my mosque, my temple. That can be home. I might not have a house. I might not have the correct term of shelter around me, but I can still have a home. And I really think that doing the humble work of sitting down and listening to our neighbors, and I believe strongly in using the word neighbor. I don't hear people here talking about clients versus providers. I hear my coworkers talk about our neighbors, and that from a power dynamic standpoint is huge, is really, I hope, contributing to that equity work of, we can acknowledge that there's a power imbalance here, but we can also name the desire to equalize it in terms of I live in Fairfax. I'm right next door to Herndon, you know, we're neighbors,
Mhm.
and what that looks like. But I think the hope comes from relating all of this work back to people, that it's people who listen, people who care, people who are showing up. We had a great event over the summer at St. John Newman Catholic Church. They let us do a food distribution there with Starkist Tuna as a sponsor. And so we gave out, I think 400 families got boxes of food, and something that could have been incredibly scary and a little bit shameful for some folks was a block party. I mean, I'm not even kidding you guys. There was speakers, we had a DJ, one of our staff members, Terrence, he was our DJ,
Mhm.
and Charlie the tuna was there. And so kids would roll up in the minivans with their parents, ecstatic to dance and so excited to high five Charlie. And so I take something
Charlie
like
the tuna
that.
didn't break dance, did he? He didn't break dance, did
The children or Charlie? Charlie
Hmm.
tried to,
Charlie
but
the tuna did break dancing?
I'm not sure if you've seen a tuna fish try to break dance recently, Marcus, but it's
No, it sounds awful.
mechanically a little
It
difficult.
sounds yeah, it sounds awful.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame him for not being able to complete that. But you had kids that were smiling. These kids weren't afraid, and you had
Right.
families being treated like actual people and not
Yes.
just numbers, or not just people in need, but hey, how you doing? How was your weekend? What are you guys up to this weekend? Oh, did you want this box? We've got this one that has this. What are your preference? Oh, kids, did you high five Charlie? Why don't you show us your dance moves? And just the fact that we can move from something that society sees as transactional and hopefully move it to relational is something that gives me hope. And truly the dedication of the people I work with is nothing short of hopeful and inspiring, because they show up every day and they make differences, and they do it with such passion that encourages me. I mean, I get to be in both worlds here of helping volunteers and donors and people who want to get involved with their neighbors, and with their neighbors who want to get to know other people as well. And so it's really a privilege and an honor to be in this role, and to work with the people I work with, but also to get to know my neighbors. I mean, that's something that I wouldn't have the opportunity to do. But if you drop something off at the Embry Rucker shelter, if you volunteer at a food distribution, you're going to meet your neighbors. There's no question about it. And so it's, again, that proximity is just life-changing for everybody. And I get, that's a very long-winded answer, but I get hope from that, Marcus.
It's a heartfelt, honest answer to the question, Sarah. And as you were speaking, I thought your words, again, your words that mean so much, okay? Transactional and transformative. Yeah. And as many of the different organizations, agencies that I've worked with in terms of church life and church revitalization. And one of them in particular I'm thinking of is Hope Partnership. And Hope Partnership talked with one of the congregations that I served. They talked with us about the distinction between transactional leadership, which is, in a sense, you're dotting the I's and you're crossing the T's.
Sure.
Okay. But in organizational life, you're dotting the I's and you're crossing the T's, but is it really providing a language and a way of life that is transforming the communities in which you say that you care about?
Right.
And that's the difference, is because transformation means transparency.
Yes.
And it also has to do with being willing to make the different translations from the organization to the community and vice versa.
And to say, I might get this wrong. I might be mistaken. And that is something that, again, back to the humility, back to those vulnerability of, as an organization, we're not going to get it right all the time, especially if we're not listening. And so I think that's such a critical piece, and one of the reasons I'm really glad to be here and glad to be this kind of connective tissue for transformative work across the board for faith communities and for our neighbors.
And I think the other is we all have needs, right? No matter where we are, we all have needs. As organizations, we have needs. As individuals, we have needs. As churches, as Cornerstones, as Marcus, as Sarah, as Kate. And when we are able to do as you've shared with us, Sarah, to be honest, to be humble, to be transparent, and that's what makes us stronger. And I think that's a part of the challenge that we have, is as leaders of communities, Cornerstones, United Christian Parish, helping people to understand that the word, I believe, is true, that it is in our weaknesses that the strength of God is made more apparent and also more available for all of us to receive
and to share and to
share. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. I'm not going to keep you. And for our listeners, this is an inside joke about this particular idiom that Sarah and I have laughed about with her first visit to UCP. It was during our coffee fellowship, which, like many churches, after Sunday morning worship, folks are provided an opportunity to fellowship among themselves, to meet and to greet and to network and enjoy refreshments as they do so. And Sarah and I had the opportunity to talk about that real meaning of I'm not going to keep you. And Sarah, what did we discover about that?
So between I'm not going to keep you and I'm going to let you go.
Yeah.
Those are two idioms that I think we on the first glance think, oh, okay, that's really great. Thank you for thinking of my time. Yeah. But when you flip it around, you're like, oh no, that person's trying to leave. that person wants to go.
I'm gonna go.
Oh, they're so concerned about my time that they're taking away their own. Huh. And so it's that polite but not polite way of saying, okay, I'd like to leave now. And don't. And it's, again,
talk about transparency, daughter. Right, Sarah?
It's that thing where you don't want to. You don't want to straight up say, I need to leave now, because that's not going to go over well. And it doesn't convey the, multitudes of, I've really enjoyed being here. I would like to be invited back. I do feel welcome here. Thank you for all of this. But it's that, well, I'm going to let you go. It just seems so altruistic, but it isn't. It really isn't. And I think we were explaining it to somebody who was a recent immigrant to this country, and so their first language wasn't English. They spoke perfect English, but explaining idioms of, like, if somebody says this to you, it's not as humble and kind as you think it is. So now Marcus and Kate, you guys are both going to be in trouble with your parishioners if they listen to this and then they catch one of you saying, well, let me not keep you.
I'm not going to keep you. Yeah, I'm not going to keep you. I'm going to let you go. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, guys. This has just been wonderful, and I'm so excited that I got to do this and could talk for, as you have seen, could talk for hours and just love the
I hope that we're going to see each other actually very soon. So
I hope so too.
And thanks for the work that you're doing with Cornerstones and in the community.
Yes, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you both for making this happen. I was telling my coworkers, I shared the questions with them and I said, these are just such thoughtful questions. These are questions that aren't yes or no answers, but are deeply invested in what the answer is, and not for superficial reasons. I showed my parents, I was just telling people, I was like, I'm so excited to talk about this. Like, this is thought-provoking, and in the best ways of, I'm not going to tell you the right answer, I'm going to tell you my truth. And we all get to decide what that is, and how that fits in our life. So thank you both for the intentionality you put into this podcast, into these conversations.
Well, you were our guest, and it was important to hear your thoughts and your interpretations, not ours.
Well, you've made that mistake twice now, Marcus. So let's see if there's a third time.